Hurricane Irma could hit Florida as a Category 5 storm. Almost 6 million people have been urged to evacuate across the U.S. states of Florida and Georgia as officials warn Hurricane Irma could regain strength and hit the state as a Category 5 storm, threatening the lives of anyone left in its path. Florida Governor Rick Scott told Southern Floridians to get out by midnight on Friday, local time, or to seek shelter nearby and hunker down. "We don't want anybody on these roads when the storm's coming through," he said. "We have shelters in your community. Go to those shelters. I mean, you go to your family, go to friends, go to those shelters. But we don't want people on the road when the storm starts to hit." The storm was downgraded to a Category 4 but could regain strength and hit Florida as a Category 5 hurricane, the most powerful designation by the National Hurricane Center, with sustained winds of 258 kilometers per hour. The United States has experienced only 3 Category 5 storms since 1851, and Irma is far larger than the last one to hit the country in 1992, Hurricane Andrew, according to the Federal Emergency Management Agency. "This is a storm that will kill you if you don't get out of the way," National Hurricane Center meteorologist and spokesman Dennis Feltgen said. Mr. Feltgen said the storm has a really wide eye, with hurricane-force winds that cover the entire Florida peninsula and potentially deadly storm surges on both coasts. "Everybody's going to feel this one," he said. The historic evacuation, including from areas around Miami, has been made more difficult by clogged highways, gasoline shortages and the challenge of moving older people. Interstates were clogged as far away as Atlanta as people fled the East Coast, with Mr. Scott telling residents that 1,700 Florida Highway Patrol people were working 12-hour shifts to help people evacuate. U.S. President Donald Trump said in a videotaped statement that Irma was a storm of absolutely historic destructive potential and called on people to heed recommendations from government officials and law enforcement. In Palm Beach, Mr. Trump's waterfront Mar-a-Lago estate was ordered evacuated. Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DFAT, said consular officials are continuing to make urgent inquiries to determine whether any Australians in the United States or Caribbean have been affected by Hurricane Irma or the earthquake in Mexico. DFAT is continuing to monitor the situation closely, it said, asking those concerned to contact family and friends in the region directly. Forecasters have repeatedly moved Irma's projected track a bit west because its long-anticipated turn north keeps getting pushed back. University of Miami researcher Brian McNulty said forecasters had expected a high-pressure system to weaken further north, allowing Irma to make the turn, but it is not weakening as fast as originally forecast. This has made it difficult for some residents to decide where they should evacuate to. On Thursday, when the forecast showed Irma coming up the coastline, Chatham County Emergency Management Director Dennis Jones had told people in Savannah to just move west. However, when Mr. Jones was asked again on Friday where residents should head after the National Hurricane Center moved its predicted storm track far inland into southern central Georgia, he could not give a location. "Honestly, I can't tell you where safe is," Mr. Jones replied. The governors of North and South Carolina warned residents to remain on guard even as the storm took a more westward track, saying their states still could experience severe weather, including heavy rain and flash flooding, early next week. Governor Terry McAuliffe has declared a state of emergency in Virginia so officials can better prepare for Hurricane Irma and help other affected states. In a statement, Governor McAuliffe said that while the track of Hurricane Irma is still uncertain, it appears increasingly likely that Virginia will see significant impacts. The whole state has been urged to prepare for possible flooding, high winds and storm surge. The U.S. Navy said they had 4 ships ready to assist with Hurricane Irma relief, including providing medical support, maritime security and logistical support. Thousands of Irma victims across the Caribbean are also desperately seeking shelter as another hurricane threatened to add to their misery. The death toll in the storm's wake across the Caribbean climbed to 22 as Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic and the eastern part of Cuba reported no major casualties or damage. But many others residents and tourists farther east were left reeling after the storm ravaged the islands, among them, St. Martin, St. Bart's, St. Thomas, Barbuda, and Anguilla. Many have fled their islands on ferries and fishing boats for fear of Hurricane Jose, a Category 4 storm with 241 km/h winds that could punish some places all over again over the weekend. "I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to know that further damage is imminent," Royal Police Force of Antigua and Barbuda Inspector Frankie Thomas said. Irma smashed homes, shops, roads and schools, knocked out power, water and telephone service, trapped thousands of tourists, and stripped trees of their leaves, leaving an eerie, blasted-looking landscape littered with sheet metal and splintered lumber. Hurricane Irma strengthened to a Category 5 storm late Friday as it made landfall in Cuba, forecasters said, on a path predicted to bring it to Florida and potentially causing catastrophic damage. Irma, with maximum sustained winds of 160 miles per hour, was making landfall on Cuba's Camagüey archipelago as of 11 p.m. ET, the National Hurricane Center said. The storm was around 300 miles southeast of Miami and is forecast to be near the Florida Keys by Sunday morning. But its effects on the Keys and in southwest Florida, which could include life-threatening storm surge, could be felt before then. Florida, first the Florida Keys, is going to be hit by a potentially devastating hurricane, and we're really very concerned, first for the Keys for storm surge, and then for the peninsula for storm surge along the coast, National Hurricane Center Acting Director Edward Rappaport said on MSNBC Friday. He said very strong winds and flooding rains were forecast to come ashore later Saturday and into Sunday. Florida Gov. Rick Scott on Friday warned people to leave the southern part of the state, and said that those not on the road by midnight should seek a nearby shelter. He said the storm is projected to be catastrophic. About 5.6 million people in Florida, more than 1/4 of the state's population, were ordered to evacuate and another 540,000 were told to leave the Georgia coast. The National Weather Service in Key West warned on Twitter Friday that nowhere in the Keys will be safe. "This is as real as it gets," the Weather Service said. President Donald Trump in a video message Friday warned this is a storm of absolutely historic destructive potential. He urged everyone in its path to heed evacuation orders. Florida Power and Light, the nation's third-largest electric utility, warned it was expecting unprecedented power outages. FPL CEO Eric Silagi said power outages could affect about 9 million people. The hurricane killed at least 23 people as it raked through the Caribbean earlier this week. The storm was a Category 5 with 160 miles per hour winds, faster than earlier Friday when it was a Category 4. On Cuba, thousands of tourists were evacuated from low-lying keys off the coast dotted with all-inclusive resorts ahead of the storm's approach. All residents of the area were under mandatory evacuation orders from the Cuban government, which was moving tens of thousands of people from vulnerable coastline. The hurricane ravaged small islands in the northeast Caribbean, including Barbuda, St. Martin and the British and U.S. Virgin Islands, ripping down trees and flattening homes and hospitals. The typically bustling downtowns of Miami, Fort Lauderdale and Naples were near empty Friday. Residents had either evacuated or were making last-minute preparations, resigned to sitting through the Category 5 hurricane in their homes and hoping for the best. Tony Marcellus struggled to figure out how to get his elderly mother and grandfather from their home near the ocean in West Palm Beach to his place in Atlanta, 600 miles away. Flights and rental cars were sold out, so he hired an Uber driver to take them 170 miles to meet him in Orlando. Manny Zuniga left his home in Miami at midnight Thursday and it still took him and his family 12 hours to get 230 miles to Orlando, a trip that normally takes 4 hours. "We're getting out of this state," he said, filling up the gas tank of his tightly packed SUV in Orlando. His final destination is a relative in Arkansas. "Irma is going to take all of Florida," he added. At least 900 flights were canceled in Florida as of Friday afternoon. Miami International Airport saw 75% of its schedule scrubbed. It will remain open but no flights are expected to arrive or depart on Saturday or Sunday. Gas supplies were put under strain. According to Gas Buddy, 38% of gas stations in Miami, Fort Lauderdale are out of fuel and 55% of Gainesville stations were depleted. In response to the shortages, Scott directed Florida Highway Patrol to escort resupply trucks to gas stations. There are currently 1,700 members of Florida Highway Patrol working the roadways on 12-hour shifts, Scott said. The U.S. Navy on Friday ordered an aircraft carrier and 2 other ships to get underway to be in position to provide humanitarian and search assistance if necessary. A 4th ship conducting local operations was ordered to join the group, the Navy said. Georgia was also preparing for the hurricane effects of Irma. Gov. Nathan Deal announced mandatory evacuations to go into effect Saturday at 8 a.m. ET for certain low-lying parts in the state's south. Even as forecasts showed the storm center could enter Georgia far inland, Deal urged nearly 540,000 coastal residents to flee, noting Irma's path remains unpredictable. Forecasts show it could enter the state Monday anywhere from the Atlantic coast to the Alabama state line. Meanwhile, Hurricane Jose shadowed Irma's movements, strengthening to a Category 4 storm on Friday with walloping winds of 150 miles per hour, according to the National Hurricane Center. Jose has brought another hurricane watch to Antigua, Barbuda, and Anguilla, and St. Martin only 2 days after the islands in the region were damaged by Irma.